She had exactly $47,000 written on a piece of paper and slid it across the table toward me like it was nothing, like it was a grocery list. The oncologist's name was Dr. Patricia Owens, and she had kind eyes that didn't match the words coming out of her mouth. She said words like, aggressive treatment protocol and pediatric specialist, and the sooner we begin, the better her odds. My daughter was sitting in the waiting room, 20 feet away, wearing the purple backpack she refused to go anywhere without. She was 6 years old. She didn't know yet. I drove home with that piece of paper folded in my pocket and my hands completely steady on the wheel. I don't know how. I think my body just decided that one of us had to hold it together, and my brain had already checked out somewhere around the phrase acute lymphoblastic leukemia. My name is Claire. I was 29 years old that October, working as a floor nurse at a mid-size hospital in Columbus, Ohio. My daughter's name is Rosie. She had brown curls and a gap between her front teeth, and she laughed at everything, even things that weren't funny, which used to drive me a little crazy, and which I would give anything in the world to hear right now. Rosie's father and I had divorced 2 years earlier. It wasn't dramatic, no cheating, no blowout fights. He was a good man who turned out to want very different things than I did, and we figured that out about 3 years too late. He lived in Denver by then. We shared custody on paper, but in practice, Rosie was with me most of the time because that's what worked for everyone's schedule, including his. I called him first. He answered on the second ring, and by the time I finished telling him what Dr. Owens had said, he was crying. He said he'd book a flight. He said he'd figure out the money situation. He said we'd handle it together, and I believed him, because whatever else had gone wrong between us, he loved Rosie fiercely, and he always showed up when it counted. Then I called my parents. My mother picked up, which surprised me. She usually let my father answer. I told her what the doctors said. I told her about the $47,000, which was the projected cost for the first phase of treatment before insurance kicked in and before financial assistance programs could be evaluated. I told her Rosie needed to start within the next 2 weeks. There was a long pause. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "That's terrible. That is just terrible news." And then she said, "The timing is just so hard. You know we leave for Italy in 10 days. I thought I had misheard her. I actually pulled the phone away from my face and looked at it for a second. My sister was getting married in Tuscany, a destination wedding that had been planned for 14 months, 60 guests, a villa rental, a photographer flown in from New York. My parents had spent, by my mother's own excited accounting, just over $30,000 on their portion of the festivities, travel, accommodations, outfits, gifts, their share of the rehearsal dinner. They had $30,000 for a party in Italy. "Mom," I said, "Rosie has leukemia." "I know, honey, I know. But we've had this trip planned for so long. And your sister, you know how much this means to her. We can't just not show up to our own daughter's wedding. I want to be very clear about something. I was not asking them to cancel the wedding. I was not asking them to disappoint my sister. I was asking them to help me pay for my daughter's chemotherapy." I told my mother this, calmly, because I was still in that strange, numb place where everything felt very far away. She said she would talk to my father and call me back. My father called me back 40 minutes later. He said they'd been going back and forth about it and they just didn't see how they could get their hands on that kind of money without liquidating some investments, and doing that on short notice didn't make financial sense. And besides, the insurance would cover most of it eventually, wouldn't it? I should look into the hospital's charity programs. I should call Medicaid. I should see if there was a payment plan. I said, "Dad, she's 6. He said, "Claire, we love Rosie more than anything. But we've been saving for this trip for 2 years and your sister needs us there. This isn't easy for us either." I hung up. I sat on the kitchen floor for a while, not crying, just sitting there with my back against the cabinets and the piece of paper in my hand. $47,000. I made $61,000 a year before taxes. I had $11,000 in savings. I had a mortgage and a car payment and a daughter who needed to start chemotherapy in 2 weeks. Rosie came padding out of her room in her socks, dragging her stuffed rabbit behind her. She climbed into my lap without saying anything, like she knew something was wrong even if she didn't know what, and she pressed her small warm head against my chest. I held her so tightly she wiggled a little and told me I was squishing her. "Sorry, baby," I said. "It's okay," she said. "You can squish me a little." I called my sister that night. I want to include this because people always ask later why I didn't appeal to her directly, and the truth is, I did. She picked up on the third ring. I could hear voices in the background, laughing. She and her fiancé were out to dinner with friends. I told her about Rosie. I told her I wasn't calling to ruin her wedding or ask her to cancel anything. I was calling to ask if she could talk to our parents, if she could just release them from feeling obligated to choose between her wedding and their granddaughter's treatment. If she could just tell them it was okay to stay. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Claire, I have 60 people coming to Italy. I can't just tell Mom and Dad not to come. Do you know how that would look?" "I don't care how it looks," I said. "Rosie is sick." "I know she's sick," she said, and her voice had gotten tight and careful, the way it got when she was about to say something she knew was unkind. "But you've always been so dramatic about everything. I'm sure the hospital has programs. Marcus can help. You're not alone in this." She called my fear for my daughter's life dramatic. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I said, "Okay. I understand." And I ended the call. They went to Italy. All three of them. My parents sent a text the morning of their flight that said, "Thinking of you and Rosie. Keep us updated. Love you both so much." My sister sent nothing. Marcus, Rosie's father, came through in a way I will never forget for the rest of my life. He flew in the next morning. He had spoken to his parents in Denver, who I had met exactly 4 times, and they had wired $10,000 into my account before I even had a chance to feel embarrassed about accepting it. His mother called me herself and said, "You don't thank us. This is what family does." I had to step outside to finish that phone call. A social worker at the hospital helped me navigate the financial assistance applications. A nonprofit that specifically helped families with pediatric cancer costs contributed another $8,000. Marcus and I together covered the rest, pulling from every corner of our separate financial lives. And Rosie started her first round of chemotherapy on a Tuesday morning with a purple blanket from home and her stuffed rabbit named George. She was so brave it broke me completely. She asked the nurses their names. She told one of them she liked her earrings. She held my hand and she didn't cry until the 3rd hour, and even then she apologized for it, which absolutely destroyed me. "You never have to apologize for crying," I told her. "Ever. Not once." "You're not crying," she pointed out. "I'm crying on the inside," I said. She thought about that. "Is that a real thing?" "Very real," I said. My parents came home from Italy 2 weeks after Rosie started treatment. My mother texted asking if they could visit. I did not respond. My father left a voicemail saying they'd been thinking about Rosie every single day and could they please come see her. I did not respond to that either. My sister sent a photo from her honeymoon in Greece, turquoise water, champagne, a caption that said, "Living our best life." I put my phone down and didn't pick it up again for 6 hours. The silence from my end was apparently very disturbing to all of them, because within a month they had each found various ways to communicate that I was being dramatic, that I was punishing them unfairly, that they had not done anything wrong. That family had to be able to disagree and still come together. My father wrote a letter, an actual physical letter explaining that they had offered what help they could, and that my expectations of them were unrealistic given the circumstances. I kept that letter. I don't know exactly why. Maybe because, on some level, I already understood that a day would come when I would need evidence of who these people had been. Rosie's treatment lasted 14 months. She lost her hair in the 2nd month, which she handled better than I did. She picked out a lavender beanie hat at the hospital gift shop and wore it every single day. She called it her super hat and told anyone who asked that it gave her powers. When her preschool teacher sent home a card signed by the whole class, Rosie told me she was famous now. Marcus visited every 6 weeks. His parents sent cards, small gifts, continuous gentle check-ins that asked real questions and waited for real answers. His mother flew out twice. Once to sit with Rosie during a particularly hard round of treatment, and once just because, she said, she wanted to see for herself that everyone was eating properly. I did not hear from my parents for almost 8 months. When they finally broke the silence through my mother, showing up at my door on a Sunday morning, I stood in the doorway and listened to her cry for a while and tell me she was sorry, that she'd been wrong, that she should have been there. And I heard all of it. I really did. But there is a particular kind of apology that comes only after months of silence, and only after the worst is already over, only after the person has had to fight through the hardest part, completely alone, and that kind of apology mostly tells you something about timing. It tells you the person is apologizing because they finally feel safe doing so, not because they couldn't live with themselves one more day without making it right. I told my mother I needed time. She left. I closed the door. We moved forward, Rosie and I. Her treatment ended the following December. Her oncologist used the word remission on a Tuesday afternoon, and I cried in the car for 45 minutes before I drove home. We got pizza that night, and Rosie wore her super hat even though she didn't have to anymore, and I let her stay up until 11 o'clock watching cartoons, and I thought, this is what I was holding on for. The years that followed were ordinary in the best possible way. Rosie grew. She went back to school. She played soccer badly and loved it anyway. She developed an obsession with baking that resulted in many experiments of varying success. She started carrying around a small music box that had belonged to Marcus's mother, a silver thing that played a few notes of something classical, and she opened it constantly, just to hear the sound of it. I went back to dating. Very slowly. I took on a second nursing certification. I bought a small house. I built a life, incrementally. The way you do when there has been a significant interruption and you have to figure out who you are on the other side of it. My parents and I reached a kind of distant peace. Not closeness, I never let them back to what we had been before, but civil. Occasional dinners, birthday calls. The kind of relationship that functions at a surface level, and neither side examines too closely. My sister and I did not recover. She had said what she said. I had heard it. We exchanged pleasantries at family events, and nothing more. I was 34 when my father had his first stroke. He recovered partially. His second stroke, 8 months later, was larger. He died on a Wednesday morning in March, with my mother and my sister at his bedside. I was not called until after. My mother explained that things had happened very fast at the end. I did not argue with this. She died 14 months after him. Heart failure, the doctor said, though I have always privately believed she simply couldn't find a reason to stay without him. I flew home for both funerals. I sat in the front row both times. I cried for who they had been to me at the beginning, before everything, when I was small and they were the whole world. Grief is not always simple. My sister called me 3 weeks after our mother's funeral. She said she wanted to talk about the estate. I said I'd come by the house that weekend. When I arrived, she was already positioned behind my father's old desk in the study, which struck me as a choice. She had a folder in front of her. Her husband was there, sitting in the corner like a witness. She slid the folder toward me across the desk. Just like the oncologist had slid that paper across the table 5 years earlier, except Dr. Owens had been trying to save my daughter's life. The folder contained a summary. My parents' estate had been assessed at just over $1.2 million. The house, investments, a life insurance policy, a retirement account that had been quietly compounding for 30 years. My sister explained that our parents had updated their will 3 years prior. The estate, per the updated will, was to pass in full to her. I was to receive nothing. I read the document twice. I kept my face neutral. I wanted to tell you in person, she said. Which I thought was an interesting way of saying it. As though this were a kindness. When was the will updated? I asked. 2021, she said. 2021 was the year Rosie was sick. The year I had called them from the kitchen floor. The year they flew to Italy. I closed the folder. I set it on the desk. I looked at my sister for a long moment. Okay, I said. She seemed surprised. She had expected, I think, a scene. Crying, maybe, begging. Some version of me that she could manage. Okay, her husband repeated. I'll be in touch, I said. And I picked up my purse and walked out of the house. I called an estate attorney the following Monday morning. Her name was Diane Ferrara, and she had been recommended to me by a colleague whose family had gone through something similar. I sat in her office and I laid out the entire timeline. I brought documentation, the texts from when Rosie was sick, the letter my father had written, the financial records showing what I had paid out of pocket, the dates my parents had been in Italy versus the dates Rosie had started treatment. I even had records of the $10,000 that Marcus's parents had wired money that had come from strangers, essentially, while my own parents watched from a villa in Tuscany. Diane listened carefully and then said, "Tell me more about 2021. Specifically," I told her. She made notes. She asked several follow-up questions. Then she leaned back and said, "The will was updated the same year they refused to assist you. I'd like to look at a few things." What she found, over the following weeks of legal discovery, was more than I had expected. The will had indeed been updated in September 2021, 2 months after Rosie's diagnosis, 1 month after Rosie started chemotherapy. The timing alone was notable. But Diane also found that my mother had maintained a separate savings account, a personal account she had opened before her marriage and never merged, which had not been included in the estate summary my sister had presented to me. That account held $43,000, nearly exactly what Rosie's treatment had cost. When Diane presented this in mediation, my sister said she hadn't known about the account. The mediator noted this without expression. Her husband, in the corner again, looked at the ceiling. I also requested the original version of the will, the one that predated 2021. It named both daughters equally. My attorney argued, based on the timing and documented circumstances, that the will change had been made under conditions that could be contested, specifically, that the alteration coincided with a period of significant family conflict driven by my parents' failure to assist me during a documented medical emergency. This wasn't going to be a simple case, Diane told me that. But it was also, she said, not a weak one. My sister's attorney made the argument that our parents had the right to change their will for any reason at any time. This is true. This is legally accurate. But legal accuracy and the full picture are not always the same thing. Mediation took 4 months. My sister's position shifted several times. Her husband, I noticed, always seemed less resolved than she did. There were moments during those sessions when she looked at me, and I could see something moving behind her eyes, not guilt, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Some recognition of the whole long story. On the final day of mediation, my sister's attorney presented a revised offer, a 55-45 split of the estate after fees, with the personal savings account going entirely to me, given its separate legal status. The personal savings account was $43,000. I looked at Diane. She looked at me. We accepted. When it was over, I sat in the parking garage for a while, with my hands in my lap. I thought about my mother opening that account before she was even married, putting money away, watching it sit there for decades. I thought about Rosie on the kitchen floor, pressing her head against my chest, telling me I could squish her a little. I thought about Marcus's mother flying out twice, once to sit with us through treatment, once just to make sure we were eating. I thought about what family actually means when you strip away the word and just look at the behavior. I called Marcus when I got to my car. "How are you doing?" he asked. "I genuinely don't know yet," I said. He laughed. A little. "That's honest. I want to put some of it in a fund for Rosie," I said. "Her college. And I want to donate some to the pediatric oncology department. The one that helped us." "Claire," he said. "Yeah, that sounds exactly right. Rosie is 10 now. Her hair grew back curly, which she did not have before, and she considers this a personal victory. She still has the stuffed rabbit named George, though she is slightly embarrassed by this and would prefer I didn't mention it. She bakes on weekends, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, and she carries the music box with her everywhere, and she opens it at random moments just to hear those few notes. She asked me once, a year or so ago, why we didn't see Grandma and Grandpa much when she was sick. I thought about how to answer for a long moment. They were going through something hard too, I said. People sometimes make the wrong choice when things are hard. She processed this with the particular seriousness she brings to difficult questions. "Do you forgive them?" she asked. I thought about that word, forgive, what it means and what it costs, and what it gives back. "I understand them better than I used to," I said. "That's the closest I've gotten." She seemed to find this acceptable. She opened her music box, listened to the few notes play through, and closed it again. I think I'd forgive them, she said. But I think I'd still be a little mad. Both of those things can be true at the same time, I said. She looked at me. Is that a real thing? Very real, I said. She smiled, her gap-toothed smile. I had told her once, during the worst of the treatment, that I was crying on the inside. She had asked me if that was a real thing and I had said yes. She remembered everything. The money from the estate is sitting in 2 separate accounts, one in Rosie's name for college, one set aside for the donation. I'm making the donation in both our names. The pediatric oncology floor has a small family lounge that needs new furniture and better lighting, and the department head told me last week that my contribution would cover it fully. I want Rosie to know that the money that didn't come when we needed it eventually found its way to children who need it now. I want her to understand that you can survive being failed, and that surviving it doesn't require you to become someone hard, that you can hold people accountable and still sleep at night, that the goal was never to punish anyone. The goal was always just to make sure she was okay. She is okay. She is more than okay. She is 10 years old with curly hair she didn't have before, and a gap in her teeth and a laugh that fills the whole room, and she bakes on Sundays, and she carries a music box everywhere she goes, and she asks real questions, and waits for real answers. She is okay, and we did that mostly on our own, with help from people who didn't have to help us, and despite people who should have. We did that. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not sure exactly when that changed, but I know this. When Rosie is older, and she comes to me with something hard, something that costs more than I have, something that requires me to rearrange my whole life, I will not be making any trips to Italy. I will be right there. That much I know for certain.